Alright, welcome back to our podcast. I'm the gentleman, accompanied by the disturbed Southern Belle.
Hello.
And in this episode, we're going to be continuing our series talking about some of the most notorious psychics, mediums, and paranormal investigators throughout history. In this segment, we'll be discussing a man who could subjectively, I guess, be called the world's first psychic.
Right.
So, Daniel Douglas Hume. He was born on March 20th of 1833 and went on to become a Scottish physical medium with the reported ability to levitate to varying heights. He was also reported to be able to speak with the dead and to produce rapping and knocks at houses at will. Harry Houdini once described him as one of the most conspicuous and lauded of his types and generation, and the forerunner of the mediums whose forte is fleecing by presuming on the credulity of the public.
Mm-hmm.
His mother, Elizabeth Betsy Hume McNeill, was known as a seer in Scotland, as were many of her predecessors, such as her great-uncle Colin Urquhart and her uncle Mr. Mackenzie. The supposed gift of second sight was often seen as a curse, as it often foretells impending tragedy and death. Danielle's father, William Hume, was reportedly the illegitimate son of Alexander the 10th Earl of Hume. Evidence of this is supported by various payments meant for William being made by Alexander. So William married Elizabeth when he was 19 years old, and he soon found employment at the Balerno paper mill. They were soon moved into one of the small houses provided by the mill for its workforce. William was described as a bitter, morose, and unhappy man, who drank and was often aggressive towards his wife. His parents had 8 children while they were living in a mill house, 6 sons and 2 daughters. One of Daniel's brothers, Adam, died while at sea at the age of 17 while he was en route to Greenland. Hume says he saw this in a vision, and it reportedly was confirmed 5 months later. Daniel was the third born of his siblings. At year 1 of his life, he was deemed a delicate child, having a nervous temperament, and this led to him being placed with his childless aunt, his mother's sister, Mary Cook. According to Daniel, his cradle rocked on its own, and while he lived at the Cook's home, he also claims to have had a vision of a cousin's death. Sometime between 1838 and 1841, Hume's aunt and uncle decided to immigrate to the U.S. with their adopted son, sailing in the cheapest class of steerage as they could not afford a cabin. After landing in New York, the Cooks traveled to Greenville, near Norwich, Connecticut. The red-haired and freckled Hume attended school in Greenville, where he was known as Scotchy by the other students. The 13-year-old Hume did not join in sports with other boys, preferring to take walks in the local woods with a friend called Edwin. The 2 boys read the Bible to each other and told stories. They made a pact, stating that if one or the other were to die, they would try to make contact after death. Daniel and his aunt soon moved to Troy, New York. Hume lost contact with Edwin until one night when, according to Lamont, Hume saw a brightly lit vision of him standing at the foot of the bed, which gave Hume the feeling that his friend was dead. Edwin made 3 circles in the air before disappearing, and a few days later a letter arrived stating that Edwin had died of malignant dysentery 3 days before Hume's vision. A few years later, Hume and his aunt returned to Greenville, and Elizabeth Hume immigrated from Scotland to America with the surviving members of the family, all to live in Waterford, Connecticut, which was 12 miles or 19 kilometers away from Cook's house. Hume and his mother's reunion was short-lived, however, as Elizabeth appeared to foretell her own death in 1850. Hume said he saw his mother in a vision, saying, "Dan, 12 o'clock," which was the time of her death. The house was soon after reportedly disturbed by rapping and knocking similar to those that had occurred 2 years earlier at the home of the Fox sisters. Ministers were called to the Cook's house. A Baptist, a Congregationalist, and even a Wesleyan minister, who all believed that Hume was possessed by the devil, although Hume believed it was a gift from God. According to Hume, the knocking did not stop, and a table started moving by itself, even though Hume's aunt put a Bible on it and then placed her full body weight on it. The noises did not stop and began attracting unwanted attention from the neighbors, which led to Daniel being asked to leave the home. The 18-year-old Hume stayed with a friend in Willimantic, Connecticut, later Lebanon, Connecticut. Hume held his first séance in March of 1851, which was reported in a Hartford newspaper managed by W.R. Hayden, who wrote that the table moved without anyone touching it and kept moving when Hayden physically tried to stop it. After the newspaper report, Hume became well known in New England, traveling around healing the sick and communicating with the dead, although he wrote that he was not prepared for this sudden change in his life because of his supposed shyness. Hume never directly asked for money, although he lived very well on gifts, donations, and lodging from wealthy admirers. He felt that he was on a mission to demonstrate immortality, and wished to interact with his clients as one gentleman to another rather than as an employee. In 1852, Hume was a guest at a house in the house of Rufus Elmer in Springfield, Massachusetts, giving seances 6 or 7 times a day, which were visited by crowds of people, including a Harvard professor by the name of David Wells, and a poet and editor of the New York Evening Post by the name of William Cullen Bryant. They were all convinced of Hume's credibility and wrote to the Springfield Republican newspaper stating that the room was well lit, full inspections were allowed, and, quoting here, "we know that we were not imposed upon nor deceived." End quote. It was also reported that one of Hume's demonstrations, or that at one of Hume's demonstrations, 5 men of heavy build with a combined weight of estimated 850 pounds
Good God.
sat on a table and yet it still moved, while others saw a tremulous phosphorescent light gleam over the walls. Hume was investigated by numerous people, such as Professor Robert Hare, the inventor of the oxyhydrogen blowpipe, and John
Okay.
W. Edmonds, a trial court judge, who were skeptical but later were said to have believed Hume was not fraudulent. So,
Alrighty then.
in his book, Incidents in My Life, Hume claims that in August of 1852 in South Manchester, Connecticut, at the house of Ward Cheney, a successful silk manufacturer, he was reportedly seen to levitate twice, then rise up to the ceiling, with louder rapping and knocking than ever before, more aggressive table movements, and the sounds of a ship at sea in a storm.
Good grief.
Although persons present said that the room was badly lit, or too badly lit to see the spirit lights, New York was now interested in Hume's abilities. So he moved to an apartment at Bryant Park on 42nd Street. His most verbal critic in New York was William Makepeace Thackeray, the author of Vanity Fair at the time. Thackeray dismissed Hume's abilities as dire humbug and dreary and foolish superstition, although Thackeray had been impressed when he saw a table turning. Hume thought that Thackeray was the most skeptical inquirer he had ever met, and as Thackeray made his thoughts public, Hume faced public skepticism and further scrutiny. Hume traveled between Hartford, Springfield, and Boston during the next few months, and settled in Newburgh by the Hudson River in the summer of 1853. He resided at the Theological Institute, but took no part in any of the theological discussions held there, as he wanted to take a course in medicine. Dr. Hull funded Hume's studies and offered to pay Hume $5 a day for his seances, but Hume refused, as always. His idea was to fund his work with a legitimate salary by practicing medicine, but he became ill in 1854 and had stopped his studies. Hume was diagnosed with tuberculosis, and his doctors recommended recuperation in Europe. Ugh, I don't know why I wanted to say England. In Europe, his last séance in America was March 1855 in Hartford, Connecticut, before he eventually traveled to Boston and sailed to England on board the Africa at the end of March.
Right.
Hume's name was originally Daniel Hume, but by the time he arrived in Europe, he had lengthened it lengthened it to Daniel Douglas Hume in reference to the Scottish House of Hume, which his father claimed to be a part of.
Right.
In London, Hume found a believer in spiritualism by the name of William Crookes, who owned a large hotel at 53, 54, and 55 Jermyn Street, London. As Cox was so enamored by Hume's abilities, he let him stay at the hotel without payment. Robert Owen, an 83-year-old social reformer, was also staying at the hotel and introduced Hume to many of his friends in London society. At the time, Hume was described as tall and thin, with blue eyes and auburn hair, fastidiously dressed but seriously ill with consumption. Nevertheless, he held sittings for notable people in full daylight, moving objects that were some distance away. Hume's fame grew, fueled by his ostensible feats of levitation. William Crookes, an English chemist and physicist, claimed Hume could levitate 5 to 7 feet above the floor. Crookes wrote, "We all saw him rise from the ground slowly to a height of about 6 inches, remain there for about 10 seconds, and then slowly descend." In the following years, Hume traveled across continental Europe, and always as a guest of wealthy patrons. In Paris, he was summoned to the Tuileries to perform a séance for Napoleon III. He also performed for Queen Sophie of the Netherlands, who wrote, "I saw him 4 times. I felt a hand tipping my finger. I saw a heavy golden bell moving alone from one person to another. I saw my handkerchief move alone and return to me with a knot. He himself is a pale, sickly, rather handsome young man, but without a look or anything which would either fascinate or frighten you. It is wonderful. I am so glad to have seen it." In 1866, Mrs. Jane Leon, a wealthy widow, adopted Hume as her son, giving him £60,000 in an attempt to gain an introduction into high society. Finding that the adoption did not change her social situation, Leon changed her mind and bought a suit for the return of her money from Hume on the grounds that it had been obtained by spiritual influence. Under British law, the defendant bears the burden of proof in such a case, and proof was impossible since there was no physical evidence. The case was decided against Hume, Mrs. Leon's money was returned, and the press pilloried Hume's reputation. Hume's high society acquaintances thought that he behaved like a complete gentleman throughout the ordeal, and he did not lose a single important friend. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, a spiritualist who supported the mediumship of Hume, stated he was unusual in that he had 4 different types of mediumship: direct voice, the ability to let spirits audibly speak; trance speaker, the ability to let spirits speak through oneself; clairvoyant, ability to see things that are out of view; and physical medium, moving objects at a distance via levitation or any other means,
Right.
which was the type of mediumship in which he had no equal. So, a few of the alleged levitations. A feat of low levitation was recorded by paranormal historian Frank Podmore, quoting here, "We all saw him rise from the ground slowly to a height of about 6 inches, remain there for about 10 seconds, and then slowly descend." End quote. Hume made one of his future closest friends in 1867, the young Lord Adair, later the 4th Earl of Dunraven. Adair was fascinated by Hume and began documenting the seances they held. The following year, Hume was said to have levitated out of the 3rd-story window of one room and back in through the window of the adjoining room in front of 3 witnesses, being Adair, Captain Wynne, and Lord Lindsay. Lord Adair stated that Hume swung out and in of a window in a horizontal position. However, John Sleight had pointed out that all 3 witnesses gave contradictory information about the levitation, each contradicting themselves about specific details. So, Adair would say the incident took place at 5 Buckingham Gate, Kensington. He would also then say at Ashley Place, Westminster. Lindsay would say at Victoria Street, Westminster. Adair would then say there was a ledge 4 inches wide below the windows. Lindsay would then say a ledge 1.5 inches wide, but then also would say no foothold at all. Adair would say balconies 7 feet apart. Lindsay would say no balconies at all. Lindsay would say the windows were 85 feet from the street, but then would also say 70 feet. Hume would say 80 feet. Adair would say on the third floor, and he would then say on the first floor, and then say it was dark. Lindsay would say there was bright moonlight. Adair would say Hume was asleep in one room and the witnesses went into the next. And he would then say Hume left the witnesses in one room and went himself into the next.
So they were just all over the place.
All over the place.
Everybody was saying one thing and then turned around saying something else and blah, 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 basically.
Pretty much.
Couldn't even get it straight where they were even at.
No.
Even the address.
Nope.
That's kind of nuts. But anyway.
So, Trevor H. Hall, who researched the case in detail, established that the levitation took place at Ashley Place in Westminster at a height of 35 feet and suggested that rather than levitating, Hume had stepped across a gap in 4 feet between two iron balconies. Gordon Stein, also noted that the gap between two balconies was only 4 feet, making passing between them entirely feasible. Joseph McCabe wrote regarding the alleged levitation, "No one professes to have seen Hume carried from window to window. Hume told the three men who were present that he was going to be wafted, and then set up a state of very nervous expectation. Both Lord Crawford and Lord Adair say they were warned. Then Lord Crawford say that he was the shadow on the wall of Hume, or that he saw the shadow on the wall of Hume entering the room horizontally, and then as the moon, by whose light he professes to have seen the shadow, was at most only 3 days old, his testimony was absolutely worthless. Lord Adair claims only that he saw Hume in the dark, standing upright outside the window. In the dark, it was an almost moonless December night. One could not, as a matter of fact, say very positively whether Hume was outside or inside. But in any case, he acknowledges that there was a 19-inch windowsill outside the window, and Hume could stand on that. Another possible natural explanation for Hume's famous levitation was proposed by the physical researcher Guy William Lambert, who suggested he had attached a rope to the chimneys of the roof of the building and hung the rope down unseen to the third floor. During the alleged levitation, Hume swung out and into the room by using a double rope maneuver. Lambert's rope hypothesis was supported by the magician John Booth. Author Arthur Conan Doyle say there were many cases on record of Hume levitating, but skeptics assert the alleged levitations occurred in darkened conditions susceptible to trickery.
Right.
Science historian Sherry Lynn Lyons has stated that a possible explanation for Hume's alleged levitation phenomena was revealed in the 12th century by Clarence E. Willard, who lived from 1882 to 1962. William revealed his technique in 1958 to members of the Society of American Magicians. He demonstrated how he could add 2 inches to his height by stretching. According to Lyons, it is quite likely that Hume used a similar technique to the one that Willard used decades later.
Right.
Author Donald Sorel Thomas has asserted that Jean-Eugène Robert Houdin, the French stage magician, was refused admission to Hume's séances. In opposition to this, spiritualists have said that Houdin was unable to explain the phenomena at a Hume séance.
Right.
Regarding both of these claims, Peter Lamont has noted, "It is probably worth noting, if only to avoid confusion, that such claims, much like those made by spiritualists that conjurers were unable to explain the phenomena, were often unfounded. For example, spiritualists claimed that Robert Houdin had been unable to explain what happened at a Hume séance, and critics claimed that Hume had refused an invitation to perform in front of Robert Houdin. There is, however, not a shred of evidence for either of these crimes." As for allegations of fraud, it is often claimed in parapsychology and spiritualist books that Hume was never caught in fraud. However, skeptics have stated that this claim does not hold up to scrutiny, as Hume was caught utilizing tricks by different witnesses on different occasions.
Right.
Gordon Stein noted that while the statement that Hume was never caught in fraud has been made many times, it simply is not true. It is simply that Hume was never publicly exposed in fraud. Privately, he was caught in fraud several times. In addition, there are natural explanations to both possible and likely for each of his phenomena. So, at a seance in the house of the solicitor John Snaith Rymer in Ealing in July 1855, a sitter by the name of Frederick Merrifield observed that a quote-unquote spirit hand was in fact a false limb attached on the end of Hume's arm. Merrifield also claimed to have observed Hume use his foot in the seance room. The poet Robert Browning and his wife Elizabeth attended a seance on June 23rd in July of 1855 in Ealing, whatever, with the Rymers. In 1895, after the deaths of Robert and Elizabeth, the journalist Frederick Greenwood alleged that Browning had told him that during the seance he had taken hold of a luminous object that appeared above the edge of the table, which turned out to be Hume's naked foot.
Oh my goodness.
So that's funny.
That is slightly comical, I won't lie.
Just imagining being in the room for that.
Oh yeah, that would be funny.
You see some quote-unquote luminous object, and some guy just reaches out and grabs it, and it's the guy's foot.
I know, it's so stupid.
That would be so awkward for everybody involved.
Yeah. It's just so dumb. Oh my gosh, I love it.
So later, Browning's son Robert, in a letter to the London Times on the 5th of December in 1902, it also referred to the incident, saying that Browning had caught hold of Hume's foot under the table. The allegation was repeated by Harry Houdini and later writers. But detailed descriptions of the seance written soon afterwards by Robert and Elizabeth make no mention of any such incident. Browning's account states that although he was promised he would be allowed to hold a spirit hand, the promise was not kept. So, a writing in the journal for the Society of Physical Research claims that Hume was caught using his foot to fake supposed spirit events during a seance in 1857. It was written that Hume wore thin shoes, easy to take off and draw on, and also cut socks that left the toes free. Quoting here, at the appropriate moment, he takes off one of the shoes, and with his foot pulls a dress here, a dress there, rings a bell, knocks one way and another, and the thing done, quickly puts his shoe on again. End quote. Hume positioned himself between the Empress and Napoleon III. One of his seance sitters, known as General Fleury, also suspected that Hume was utilizing trickery and asked to leave, but returned unobserved to watch from another room behind Hume. He saw Hume slip his foot from his shoe and touch the arm of the Empress, who believed it to be one of her dead children. That's so sad.
It is.
And so scummy if true.
It is. It's very scummy, and they do it though. I mean, it's true. I mean, you've heard things like this happening.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's sad. It is. It's very sad. That's why I said it's.
So, on the assumption that this is true, what happens next is so satisfying. So the observer stepped forward and revealed the fraud, and Hume was conducted out of the country. The order was to keep the incident secret, however. So, yeah.
Oh, well.
Oh, no.
Boo-hoo, I guess, huh?
So, the journalist Delia Logan, who attended a seance with Hume in London, claimed that Hume had used a phosphorus trick. During the seance, luminous hands were observed, and the host told Logan that they had seen Hume place a bottle upon the mantelpiece. The host slipped the bottle from his pocket and when examined into his pocket, and when examined the next day, it was found to contain phosphorus oil.
Mm-hmm.
So, speculations on trickery. The researchers Frank Podmore in 1910, Milburn Christopher in 1970, Trevor H. Hall in 1984, and Gordon Stein in 1993 were all convinced that Hume was a fraud and have provided a source of speculation on the ways in which he could have duped his seance sitters. Skeptics have claimed the lighting condition of Hume's seances, or criticized the lighting conditions anyway.
Right.
Hume and his followers claim that some of the seances took place in quote unquote light, but this was nothing more than a few candles or some glow from the fireplace or open window. Hume would adjust the lighting to his needs and with no objections from his seance sitters. For example, there was this report from a witness. The room was very dark. Hume's hands were visible only as a faint white heap.
Mm.
Hume selected the seance sitters who sat next to him. His hands and feet were not controlled, and according to Frank Podmore, no precautions were taken against trickery. Hume was never searched before or after his seances. Science historian Sherry Lynn Lyons wrote that the glowing or light-emitting hands in his seances could easily be explained by rubbing the oil of phosphorus on his hands. It has been suggested that the quote-unquote spirit hands in the seances of Hume were made of gloves stuffed with the substance, sorry.
Right.
Robert Browning believed that they were attached to Hume's feet. A lot of foot stuff going on.
Fair enough. It was like that with the Fox sisters as well in the last episode.
Yeah.
It's very much so. A lot of wrapping and feet involved. People grabbing feet even in this one.
Hume was a sculptor, and his studio in Rome contained sculpted hands. Lyons has speculated that he may have substituted sculpted hands, leaving his real hands free to perform phenomena in the seance room.
Makes sense.
Hume was known for his alleged feat, F-E-A-T, of handling a heated lump of coal taken from a fire. The magician Henry Evans speculated that this was a juggling trick performed using a hidden piece of platinum. Which also, to be fair, holding a piece of hot coal would not be terribly hard to trick people with.
Not necessarily. Just depend. I mean, there's lots of
Even back then.
I mean, there's lots of things you do, right?
So here Ward Carrington described Evans' hypothesis as certainly ingenious, but pointed out William Crookes, an experienced chemist who was present at a seance whilst Hume was performing the feat, and would have known how to distinguish the difference between coal and platinum.
Right.
Frank Podmore wrote that most of the fire feats could have easily been performed by conjuring tricks and sleight of hand, but hallucination and sense deception have explained Crookes' claim about observing flames from Hume's fingers.
Right.
Between 1870 and 1873, chemist and physicist William Crookes conducted experiments to determine the validity of the phenomena produced by three mediums: Florence Cook, Kate Fox, and Hume. Crookes' final report in 1874 concluded that the phenomena produced by all three mediums were genuine, a result which was roundly derided by the scientific establishment. Crookes recorded that he controlled and secured Hume by placing his feet on the top of Hume's head.
Okay.
A lot of foot stuff.
Definitely.
A lot of foot stuff in Hume's life.
Very much so.
Must have been a foot guy.
Maybe so.
Crookes' method of foot control later proved inadequate when used in Eusapia Palladino, or when used with, as she merely slipped her foot out and into her sturdy shoe. In addition, Crookes' motives, methods, and conclusions with regard to Florence Cook were called into question both at the time and subsequently, casting doubt on his conclusions about Hume. Hume was investigated by Crookes in a self-built laboratory at the rear of his house at Mornington Road, North London, in 1871. No plans of the laboratory have been found, and there is no contemporary description of it. Crookes wrote the board, and spring balance experiment was a success with Hume and has proven beyond doubt the existence of a quote-unquote psychic force. However, the experiment could be easily dismissed as the result of vibrations caused by the passage of Euston trains and the large railway cutting near his house in London. The experiment was not repeatable and sometimes failed to produce any phenomena. The experiment was rejected and ridiculed by the scientific community for lack of scientific controls. In the experiment, Hume refused for Crookes to be near him and would draw attention to something on the other side of the room or make conversation for diversionary signals. In 1871, Balfour Stewart, in an article for Nature, wrote that the experiments were not conducted in broad daylight before a large, unbiased audience, and the results were inconclusive. Stewart suspected the phenomena observed were subjective rather than objective, occurring in the imaginations of those present rather than the outward physical world. In the same year, P.J. Earwaker wrote a science review that heavily criticized the Crookes experiments for their poor design, concluding that they were pseudoscientific. According to Earwaker, for in truth they are the very opposite of scientific. Even to call them unscientific is not strong enough. Clumsy and futile are nearer the truth. The engineer Coleman Sellers questioned the origin and weight of the board used with the balance spring apparatus. Sellers wrote that a standard mahogany board weighs around 13.5 pounds, but the one used in Crookes' experiment may have been at fault only 6 pounds. Crookes responded to Sellers, claiming the board weighed 6 pounds, and this was not a mistake. He also stated he had the board for about 16 years, and it was originally cut in a lumber yard. Regarding Crookes, the magician Harry Houdini wrote, there is not the slightest doubt in my mind that this brainy man was hoodwinked, and that his confidence was betrayed by the so-called mediums that he tested. His powers of observation were blinded, and his reasoning faculties so blunted by his prejudice in favor of anything psychic or occult that he could not or would not resist the influence. In the accordion experiment, Hume sat at a table with Crookes and another observer on either side of him, each with a foot on one of Hume's feet. Hume inserted his hands inside a wire cage that was pushed under the table. One of Hume's hands was placed on top of the table and the other inside the cage, which held an accordion on the non-key side, so the keyed end was hanging downwards. The accordion was reported to have played musical sounds. However, the amount of light in the room was not stated, and the accordion was not observed in good light. According to Frank Podmore, there was no evidence the accordion played at all, as the keys were not observed to have moved. Podmore suggested the musical sounds could have come from an automatic instrument that Hume had concealed. In 1871, William Benjamin Carpenter wrote a critical evaluation of the Crookes experiments, with Hume in the Quarterly Review. Carpenter wrote that although Crookes, his assistant, and Sergeant Cox claimed to have observed the accordion float in the cage, Dr. Huggins did not testify to this, and no information was given on whether the keys and bellows were seen to move. According to Carpenter, no solid explanation could be given until the experiment is repeated. However, he suggested that the accordion feat that Hume performed may have been a conjuring trick achieved with one hand. Carpenter concluded that Crookes could or should have repeated the experiment in open daylight, without the cage and the presence of other witnesses. J.P. Earwaker heavily criticized the design of the accordion experiment, as it took place under a dining room table. Earwaker, who read Crookes' report, noted that no reason for this strangest of all strange positions is even hinted at. He also wrote, it never occurred to Crookes to notice whether the keys were depressed or not. It would be obvious if the keys were not pressed down. It was impossible for the music really to have come from the accordion, and its true source must have been looked for elsewhere. The writer, Amos Norton Kraft, suggested a false keyboard. The trick has since been often repeated and explained. The medium must have the semblance of keyboard, made of some light material, concealed in his coat sleeve or about his person. This he then attaches to the bottom of the accordion, which he holds in his hand. Then, when unobserved, while the learned professor is taking down his notes for the public press, He reverses the accordion and attached the false keyboard on the bottom by means of a small hook attached to it, fastens it to the side of the basket. Having now the real keyboard in his hand, he can produce musical sounds. Afterward, the accordion floated about in the basket under the table without giving contact of Mr. Hume's hand. The subsequent phenomenon was given to avoid immediate examination of the first by keeping Professor Crookes in suspense, and giving the medium time to reverse the instrument and conceal in his clothing the false keyboard which had been on the bottom of the instrument. The keyboard, which had been the accordion, was now suspended by means of a small hook fastened to a dark thread which would be invisible in gaslight. Gordon Stein then wrote, Hume could easily have produced the sound of the accordion concertina by the use of a small harmonica concealed in his mouth. The up and down movement of the accordion could easily have been produced by catching the bottom of the accordion in a loop of black thread or on a hook. Hume retired due to ill health. The tuberculosis, from which he had suffered for much of his life, was advancing, and he and his powers were failing. He died on the 21st of June, 1886, at the age of 53, and was buried in the Russian cemetery of Saint-Germain-en-Laye in Paris. And that's it.
Well, he's definitely an interesting character. I mean, at the very least, being able to trick people into thinking you can levitate and do all these things is interesting. I mean,
Absolutely it is.
now I know people can still do that today, but still, it's cool. I mean, especially back then, I imagine it would have been phenomenal, unbelievable. But it is comical as well. Things.
Imagine a modern day musician going back to then.
Right.
That'd be called a witch.
I mean, yeah, I know. Yeah, definitely. Some of the things they could do. But yeah, the sleight of hand, just very simple techniques.
God, I imagine even the card tricks that I know how to do.
Phosphorus oil. I mean, just, yeah, it's crazy.
And I'm definitely not anything near to a sleight of hand expert.
Right.
Most of what I do are like magician forces and stuff.
But yeah, very interesting. We hope you enjoyed that segment. We'll be continuing on next week with another. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. And don't forget to stay disturbed.